In the green shade of a wood, a boy knelt over a pool of still water and reached for the beautiful face gazing up at him, and he did not know that the face was his own. This is the story that gave the world two words we still use every day, an echo and a narcissist, and beneath them, a warning older than any mirror. He was born of water. His father was the river god Cephissus, who caught the blue water nymph Liriope in his winding current. And their child was a boy of impossible beauty, lovely even in the cradle. His mother, half afraid of a thing so beautiful, carried the child to the one man who could read the will of the gods, the blind seer Tiresias, and asked the oldest question of every mother, "Will my son live to grow old?" The prophet was silent a long while, and then he gave an answer no one could untangle. Yes, the boy would live to a great old age, but only if he never came to know himself. It was a riddle with no lock. How could knowing yourself ever be a doom? No one could make sense of it, and so, as prophecies are, it was set aside and half forgotten until the day it came true. Narcissus grew, and his beauty grew stranger and brighter with him. By the time he was 16, a boy still, and already a man, there was no one in all the countryside who did not want him. But inside that lovely body lived a strange, hard pride, a coldness that let no one come close. He took the love of the whole world as his due, and gave nothing of himself back. Youth and maiden alike reached for him, and he passed through their longing like a man walking through tall grass, and left every one of them broken behind him. Among the hills lived a nymph named Echo, once the brightest and most talkative of all the mountain nymphs, a girl whose tongue was never still. One day she saw Narcissus driving the deer through the woods, and love took her all at once, like a sudden fever she could not shake. But she could not simply go to him and speak, for Echo carried a punishment older than her love, a curse that had fallen on her long before. For once, the goddess Hera had come down into these woods to catch her husband Zeus at his loves among the nymphs, and Echo had been in on the secret. And Echo would meet the goddess on the path and hold her with long, winding, delightful talk, spinning out the minutes on and on while the guilty nymph slipped away into the trees. And when Hera understood at last how she had been played, her fury fixed on the one thing that had fooled her, the tongue that would not stop talking. "That tongue that made a fool of me," she said, "will do the least of all from now on. You will never speak first again. You will keep only the very last of whatever you hear, and give it back and no more." So now, on fire with love and unable to say a word of it, Echo could do nothing but follow Narcissus in silence, trailing him from tree to tree, feeding her heart on the mere sight of him. Then one afternoon, Narcissus was cut off from his hunting companions, and, hearing something move in the trees, he called out into the wood, "Is anyone here?" And Echo, with a leap of joy, gave him back the only word she could, "Here." Astonished, he looked around and saw no one. "Come," he cried, and "come" came back to him out of the trees. "Why do you run from me?" he called, and heard his own words returned. At last he called, "Let us meet here. Come to me." And Echo, happier in that moment than she had ever been in her whole life, answered with all her heart, "Let us meet." And she burst out of the wood with her arms flung wide, and ran to throw them around the neck of the boy she loved. And Narcissus leapt back from her as from something loathsome, and threw up his hands and cried, "Hands off! I would sooner die than let you have me." And all poor Echo could do was whisper back the tale of his cruelty, "Let you have me." Ashamed to her very bones, Echo fled from him into the deep woods and the lonely caves, and there she hid her burning face away from the world. And there her unanswered love began to eat her alive. Sleepless grief thinned her, her body wasted, her flesh dried into the air until almost nothing of her was left. Her bones, they say, turned to stone, and at the end there was nothing left of the bright nymph Echo at all, nothing but her voice, which lives in the empty hills to this day, and which can only ever answer, and never, ever speak first. But Echo was only one of the many Narcissus had wounded, nymphs and youths alike, all cast aside. And the wounded do not always suffer in silence. At last one of them, a young man he had scorned and thrown off like all the rest, lifted his hands to the sky and prayed a short, terrible, and perfectly just prayer. "So may he himself love," he cried, "as we have loved him, and never possess the thing he loves." And the goddess Nemesis, who holds the scales of every arrogance, heard him and judged the prayer just. Now there was, deep in the woods, a pool like no other, a spring of water clear as silver and utterly still, that no shepherd had fouled, no beast had ever drunk from, no falling leaf had ever troubled. And to this pool came Narcissus, worn out and thirsty from the hunt and the heat of the chase, and he lay down on the grass at the water's edge to drink. But as he bent his mouth to the water, a second and a stranger thirst seized him. For there, in the still silver surface, a face was gazing up at him, the most beautiful face he had ever seen in all his life, and he fell in love with it on the spot, not knowing it was his own. He took the reflection for some lovely spirit, living in the water, a being of impossible beauty, and he loved a shadow, taking for a body a thing that had no substance at all. He leaned closer and reached out to embrace the beautiful stranger, and the moment his fingers touched the water, the face shattered and fled, the surface breaking into rings. So he drew back and held himself perfectly still, and slowly the water calmed, and the beautiful face rose back into the silver, gazing up at him with the very same longing he felt himself. He spoke to it softly, and he saw its lips move as if to answer him, but no sound ever reached his ears. He wept, and it wept with him. He smiled, and it smiled back. He stretched his arms toward it, and it stretched its arms toward him. It gave him love for love, and yet it would not come out and would not be held. He forgot to eat. He forgot to sleep. He forgot the hunt and the deer and the whole world beyond the water. He could not tear himself from the pool's edge. And he pleaded with the beautiful thing, "Why do you flee me? Nymphs have loved me. Your own face is full of love for me. When I reach, you reach. When I weep, you weep. Your lips move as though you would answer." And then, slowly, terribly, the truth broke over him, the very doom the blind prophet had named at his birth. "Oh," he whispered, "that is me. I understand it now. I am the one I am burning for. I light the fire and I am the fuel." And his was the cruelest grief of any lover who ever lived. For what he desired he carried always with him. The thing he longed for was himself, and his own longing had made him a beggar. He could not leave himself, and he could not have himself. The lover and the beloved were one and the same, with a little space of water between them that no love on earth could ever cross. "Would that I could part from my own body," he said. The strangest wish that any lover has ever made, to be divided from himself, so that he might at last reach the one he loved. And now grief burned him as love had burned him. He tore the robe from his breast and beat his pale chest until it flushed, mourning the beauty he could never hold. And under the water's eye he began to waste away. The golden beauty that had made the whole world ache for him melted like yellow wax before a low flame, and thawed like the morning frost when the sun first touches it. And through all of it, Echo, whom he had cast off, whom he had helped to destroy, had never truly gone from those hills. Now, watching him fail, her old anger died in her, and only grief was left. She could not go to him, but she could not leave him either. When he groaned, "Alas," over the water, alas came softly back to him out of the caves. When he struck his breast in sorrow, she gave back the very sound of the blows, the last conversation the two of them would ever have. And at the very end, he leaned over the pool one final time, and to the beloved face he could never keep, he said a single, quiet word, "Farewell." "Farewell," Echo answered, from far off in the hills, the only gift she had left to give the boy who had broken her heart. He laid his weary head down on the green grass at the water's edge, his eyes still fixed to the last upon the reflection that he loved. And death closed the eyes that had marveled so long at their own beauty. And it is said that even when his shade went down into the underworld, it bent over the black river Styx to look for itself one more time in the water. Up in the world above, the naiads of the streams wept for him and cut their hair in mourning. The dryads of the woods wept, and Echo wept with them and gave back every cry of their grief. They gathered wood and built a pyre. They brought the torches and made ready the bier to carry his body away. But when they turned to lift him, the body was gone. Where he had lain in the pressed grass at the water's edge, they found instead a flower. White petals folded close around a heart of gold, bowed on its slender stem so that it leaned forever out over the surface of the pool. And they gave it his name. We call it the Narcissus to this day, the flower that still leans out over quiet water as though to gaze at its own reflection. And so in a strange way, the boy who could love no face but his own is bent above his own reflection still. And out of that one wood came two words that the world has never given back. Echo, the voice that can only answer, that repeats the last words of another and can never once speak first. And Narcissus, the one who can love no face and no soul but his own. But the old Greeks meant something sharper than mere vanity, something that cuts far closer to the bone. His doom was not that he loved himself. It was that he could not know himself, that to the very edge of death, the face in the water stayed a stranger to him. Over the great oracle at Delphi, two words were carved for every Greek to read: know thyself. And the blind prophet had turned them, for this one boy, into a curse. For the single thing that could kill him was to meet his own eyes and finally understand. Strangely, it is a Roman poet, Ovid, who braided the two of them together, Echo and Narcissus, the voice and the reflection, though the boy at the spring is older in Greek, and the flower is older still than the boy. And so the great age of mortals goes on, of lovers who reach for what they cannot hold, of the wonder and the ruin that come when longing has nowhere true to land. The water still waits in the old stories and in us. We lean over our own reflections, half in love with what looks back, half afraid to learn whose face it truly is. And that is why, after 2,000 years, this myth has never once let us go. Thank you for watching. If this tale stayed with you, subscribe. A new myth arrives every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Until then, may the old stories keep their hold on you.